All right, I'm going to record right now. So, so Peter, I'm going to start our interview right now, and I just want to thank you for coming on and participating in this interview. So, obviously, Peter, as somebody who's a restaurant owner, I guess the most obvious question we would ask right now is, how do you see, as mayor, how would you help the restaurants come back, right? That's the first question.
Okay, so what was done to the restaurants should have never been done. I spent a lot of time during the pandemic on Fox and Friends, on Newsmax, on all these stations, and they kept asking me the same question, which was, how are your restaurants in New York City faring as opposed to your restaurants in Miami? We have 11 restaurants in South Florida. South Florida, we're breaking records. We've never had such a busy December, January, February, and we're still on track for a record-breaking March. So my answer was always, well, New York City politics is killing the restaurant business. We should have never been closed down. We were not closed down in Florida, and in Florida we strive. And if you look at our infection rate during the time, we were only off by 1.5%, 2% in the peak. So why are we being closed down? And it was all political. And I'll give you an example why it was all political. When they shut down the restaurants in New York City, we were at 4% infection rate. After the Republicans lost and Biden got into the White House and the Democrats took over, they reopened up the restaurants inside dining at 6.5%. So what changed? Why were we closed at 4%? And then we reopened at 6.5 inside. It was a political. It had nothing to do with the virus. The Democrats wanted to make it seem like, they're doing their job and things are trying to get back to normal. So that's the first thing that really made me suspicious as to why we are now being opened up when the infection rate is actually higher. Then the other thing is having us go into the middle of the street in New York City made no sense. Why didn't they go the high-tech route like with airports, hospitals, government buildings? You go to an airport, you're not sitting in a little hut waiting for your plane. You go to the hospital, you're not sitting in a little hut outside waiting for the doctor to come and see you. They should have gone the high-tech route like what these buildings did. What they did is, I own a construction company. We build many homes throughout Connecticut, and I built all our beach restaurants. So I know what I'm talking about when I talk about construction. They could have retrofitted the HVAC systems in the restaurants with the UCV filter, which is what the planes are doing, which is what the state buildings are doing, the trains. Everybody is doing this. And what it does is, any of the virus, and it's been proven to kill the COVID-19 virus, when it goes through the system, it gets zapped, it gets zapped by this white UV light, and it kills the virus. We could have retrofitted our restaurants to have this HVAC system. And if we couldn't afford to do it, maybe there could have been a grant installed and we could have paid it back little by little. But most people, when they built these huts on the street, they spent at least $10,000. And to retrofit these HVACs might have been 15 or 20. So we weren't off by a lot. The other thing we could have done is we could have gone through scattered seating. Any New Yorker knows that New Year's Eve in New York City, you can't just walk into a good, decent restaurant, right? Because they're packed, they're sold out. So they give you seatings, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7, you have to pick. What we could have done during the COVID epidemic was 5 o'clock, you sit the restaurant. You give the diners an hour and a half to eat till 6:30. From 6:30 to 7, you bring in the system with the UV lights like they do in the hospital rooms and zap the whole restaurant, clean it all. Then at 7 o'clock, you get your second seating till 8:30. 8:30 to 9, you zap the restaurant, get everything clean. This is what we should have done instead of doing these huts in the middle of the street, right? We've lost a lot of revenue. A lot of restaurants are dying. Thank God most restaurants got PPP. And there was a second round that came out about a month ago. But if I became mayor, we would never go back to those street huts ever again because we have technology. We should have gone the route of technology instead of going back to the covered wagons day. You see the mess. If you drive around the city of New York, it's a mess. The garbage trucks can't get through. Every other week, you have somebody running into one of these structures. Come on. I mean, we're America, for heaven's sake. We don't have the technology to do one better than to do huts. And it doesn't make any sense. Most of these huts have 7-foot ceilings. They're 10 foot wide because they can only take up one lane of a car by, 15, 20 feet long. How is the virus not going to concentrate in there? It just makes no sense.
Peter, one of the things that I'm really curious about is, what do you think the one thing that the restaurant or small business owners want more than anything else from government? What do you think they really want more than anything else?
They want to stop the restrictions. Everybody points to the restaurants to blame. What they don't realize is that nobody comes into the city to see de Blasio. Nobody comes into City Hall. People come in to go to Broadway. People come in to go to our fine museums, and people come in to go to our clubs, our bars, and our restaurants. We're the number one draw to New York City, but yet we were punished like we were, we were not making our contribution to the city. This has to stop. It didn't happen in Florida. It didn't happen in Texas. Texas isn't any worse than we were with the infection. Florida wasn't any worse. But you know what? The Florida economy is thriving. You know what our economy in New York City is doing right now? We're $14 billion in the hole. We brought in $210 billion in 2019, and we're broke. And a lot of it comes from revenue from restaurants, sales tax, property tax, unemployment tax.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Peter, like one of the big issues in the campaign right now, and I think it's, we've read a lot about the stuff about people like cancel rent, cancel this, cancel that. But I want to focus on cancel rent, because I think one of the issues or one of the great divides in this campaign, right, is that people are saying, okay, cancel rent, let's have the city buy all the housing, right? And then just give free rent to people, and they own the housing, which we know from the, New York City Housing Authority is not the greatest conditions, right? Or there's another path of saying, listen, one of the ways to, reduce a lot of problems, including crime and riots and everything, is you put people in ownership situations in their own homes, whether it's a co-op or whatever it might be. So taking people out of kind of like a, like a vertical, housing hell, right, to, some kind of ownership situation. How would you work? Do you agree with that? And how would you work that as mayor?
All right. So step number one, the rent, right? Ridiculous. The only people that say forgive rent, the only people that even talk about canceling rent are people that have no idea how a fiscal budget works and has no idea how the wheel spins. What we need to do is this. We need to sit with the federal government and say, New York City is too big to fail. You bailed out GM, you bailed out Ford, you've given $200 million in aid to Nicaragua and all these third world countries. New York City needs to operate in this facet. If Joe's Pizza, for example, I'm just throwing out names, owes $100,000 to ABC Realty, the city should step in and say, ABC Realty, you're going to forgive Joe Pizza $100,000. In return, we're going to take $100,000 off the taxes that you're going to owe to the city. So the landlord is made whole and the tenant is taken care of. Then we go to the federal government and we say, we need 2.2, whatever the number is, of relief package for New York City. We're too big to fail. The federal government didn't protect the city. The COVID came in with no blame of our own. They've helped out many countries. They've helped out many corporations with bailout packages. We need to get help from the federal government, and we need to do that kind of.
Well, what would you say, Peter, on the folks that are just regular families, right? That are kind of like, listen, I'm stuck in public housing, but I would love to own a, co-op, right? You know what I mean? How do you get from this thing where, the city's in billions and billions of dollars in debt, right, in public housing, right, and terrible conditions, to people having an opportunity, right, to, have some kind of ownership stake? What would you do?
So I've been asked this question before. I was on another Zoom meeting a few weeks ago where the exact same question was asked to me. So here's the thing. whenever the city gets involved with anything that is too complicated, it screws it up, right? You ever try going to motor vehicles? It's a nightmare. You ever try going to the health department, which I do all the time when I pull permits for my restaurants? It's a nightmare. You ever try to get a building permit when I build my restaurants in the city? It's a freaking nightmare. Anytime the city gets involved with stuff, it makes it a nightmare. First thing we need to do is we need to take public housing away from the city. For 100 years, for as many years as the city has taken over public housing, it's a mess.
Where would you put it? Where would you put it?
We would need to get developers in and offer them a deal. Listen, we're going to give you this housing because right now we're in so much debt. We're not collecting revenue from our public housing. It's a debt situation to the city. Bring in the private developers and say, we're going to give you this for $1. You're now going to own the tax base. You're going to collect the rents. And then we're going to put in programs where people that live in the housing can purchase a rent to buy situation. But as long as the city remains in control of our housing, it will always be a mess. As long as the city is in charge of our school system, it will always be a mess. We need to put housing, schools in the hands of professionals, of people who have business sense. The same people that are running motor vehicles, the health department, the building department, are the same people in charge of these important situations. People, and I'm not going to be a favorite guy, right? When I start talking about motor vehicles in the health department and the building department, people are going to say I'm not pro-city, but I am pro-city. But I'm pro-city to get the right people in position to run the city, not just because, you have a status that you need to fill. Whatever happened to giving the job to the right people? Whatever happened for earning your space in line? Whatever happened to, being put in the position because you're qualified? We need to stop this. It's just too much. And look at what's happened. In 8 years, de Blasio has defunct the city. Our crime rate is through the roof. The morality in the city is the lowest it's ever been. People are leaving in groves, and you know where they're going? They're going to Florida. And I know this because I have 11 restaurants in Florida. I see my customers telling me they're leaving to Florida. We need to have proper people in charge of city, in the city big project. And I'm telling you, we start making these offers to developers around the world, people will come in. They'll take over these positions.
Okay, great. The other issue that I think a lot of people talk about is the homelessness problem. Now, I'm going to attack this from a different point of view and not from a neighborhood by neighborhood and like, oh my goodness, there's crime going on and everything. But what I have learned over the last few months is that the city has basically spent $3.2 billion, right, from the mayor's office and the mayor's wife and everything on homelessness and attacking this. And what I'm trying to figure out right now is where has all that money gone, right? And basically, what are we getting out of this? Because what I've heard from everybody and what I've seen personally is that the problem's worse than ever. So like, I'm trying to think of this from a governmental standpoint, not a mental health standpoint, because everyone wants to say like, okay, well, we're going to give better mental health and so forth. And that's great. And I think everyone agrees on that. But how do you deal with this kind of like this homeless industrial complex problem, right? Where the government's spending all this money on homelessness and the problem's not getting solved. How would you address that?
All right, so perfect. So there you go. Another situation that the city is involved in, and it's a freaking mess because the city can't get out. The city workers, the city staff, they cannot get. They can't find their way out of a paper bag.
Well, all right. So you had the $3.2 billion. What will you do?
So here's the thing. First of all, de Blasio, they took $1 billion out of the policeman's fund when, the BLMs were chanting and raving about defunding the police, which makes no freaking sense. Don't even get me started on that topic. I have a lot to say. But they took $1 billion from the police. They put $1 billion into a fund called Strive, which de Blasio's wife was in charge of. There's $850 million unaccounted for. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's rioting in the streets. Nobody's being investigated. If I become mayor, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to launch an investigation. I'm going to hire a forensics accountant to find out where that $850 million went. The problem is the money is not being spent. The money is being swindled, or it's being backdoored to other departments, and it's not going to where it needs to be going. The problem with the homeless is we aren't prepared for the homeless. Because I'm running for mayor, I don't like to talk offhand and not know what I'm talking about. So you know what I've done? I've visited the homeless shelters in Manhattan. I visit the mental wards in our hospitals. They're a mess. They need to be fixed. For example, most homeless people have some psychological issue. They have schizophrenia. There's something going on. No red-blooded, sane individual is going to want to live in the streets, right? That's common across everybody's thinking. The homeless shelters right now, if you go into a homeless shelter, you get an apple, you get a juice box, and you get a cot. They have to be equipped with security, better security, because the homeless are always complaining, and I've interviewed homeless. They complain they get raped, they complain they get robbed, and they complain they get beat up. So they don't want to go into homeless shelters. They have a very bad reputation. We need to clean up that reputation. We need to put security in there, and then we need to put counselors. We need to put psychiatrists. We need to put medical professionals that can evaluate this person when they come in and say, he is a borderline schizophrenic. He needs to be committed to whatever system they set up in the city, right? We're not doing that right now. You give them a juice box, you give them an apple, you give them a cot, and they're off on their way. They're back on the streets. So first we need to fix the system. Then we got to stop being hypocrites. If we fix the system, then the homeless people only have two options. Go into the system that is fixed now and we can help you, or you're not going to be able to live on the street. You're not going to be able to live on the street. There's a law on the books. So why are we just looking the other way? So they either need to be committed or they need to be incarcerated. And I know what people are going to say, oh, you want to incarcerate the homeless? No, I want to fix the homeless, but we can't allow them to be on the streets, right? Because we're hypocrites. We look the other way. We look the other way at the homeless, but we don't care about the person who owns the $3 million apartment that the homeless are pissing out in front. Why are we giving more value to them and not to the person who is a law-abiding citizen with kids and paying taxes? Do you know what the #1 product is stolen from at Duane Reade and CVS in New York City? And I know this because the chief of police is one of my best friends. The #1 product stolen is baby formula. This is why it's locked up. They break the locks, they steal the baby formula to feed their kids. If you get caught doing this, you go to jail.
I never knew that. That's amazing. Right? Wow. I never knew that. Wow.
You go to jail. So we have no sympathy for a mother who breaks a lock at CVS.
Kenny, by the way, welcome to the meeting. I know you got somebody new coming in. Hello. Katie? Hello? I think somebody's new in there. I know we lost her. Anyway, okay, so we have come back in.
So we have no passion for the mother who's stealing formula, Duane Reade or CVS. We lock her up. But yet we look the other way when there's a homeless guy pissing on the streets and throwing traffic and throwing garbage in the middle of the road. We need to stop being hypocrites. We need to stop being a lawless city. The law is there for a reason and everybody has to follow it. Whether you're homeless or whether you're an Ivy League guy on the Upper East Side, follow the law.
Absolutely. I'm going to open this up to questions in a minute, but I have one big question to you because obviously you're running as an independent. It's, an uphill battle. As I told you, I've been in politics for a long time. One of the crossover issues that I think is really big right now, and I'm just curious to see what your thoughts are on this, is I think there is a huge problem with, in particular, a lot of single moms in the city that have kids in the school system, right? And these kids, and I've heard these stories crazy stories of kids bootlegging internet out of McDonald's in 20-degree weather in the Bronx because they won't open the schools, right? And I think, I just think that's a huge problem. And I think that, as you know, this is an uphill battle. So I'm trying to figure out from you of how you plan to win this campaign. And I'm wondering I think one of the big crossover voter in the general election in the city are these single moms that have kids in these schools, and these kids are getting robbed of their education. So I would love to know what you would say to these moms and how you would fix the situation and kind of preserve their kids' future.
So I'll start off with your first question first. As an independent, the reason I'm an independent is because I could not get behind the Republicans running. I could not get behind the Democrats running. So I have to go as an independent. So at least I'm in the middle of the road, and maybe I'll be able to get a couple of people who also feel the way I do and vote my way. The Republican Party in New York City is a joke. This is why they're not taken care of, right? So the chairs got behind two guys. Mateo, who's a felon. His restaurant was shut down for trafficking cocaine out of it on the Upper West Side there, La Marina. He lost his liquor license. He can never have a liquor license again in the state of New York City. He owes the city $500,000 of back sales tax on La Marina, property tax on La Marina. He kept $200,000 from people, deposits for weddings they were going to do at La Marina. And now we want to make him the mayor of New York City? You can't run a restaurant. How are you going to run the biggest and best city in the world? The other candidate, Sliwa, never owned a business in New York City. He's never had to pay taxes, never had to do a budget, never had to struggle and figure out how to be the new best thing to get customers in. He was a vigilante when I used to own my nightclub back in the day. So now you have the criteria to run the best city in the world because you're a vigilante? I don't understand what the Republican Party is doing. Now let's move over to the Democrat Party, right? If you look at the three top contenders, you have Yang, who left the city because he was afraid of COVID, never owned a business in New York City, never paid taxes in New York City, never paid business rent or corporate tax in New York City, but yet now he's qualified to be the next mayor of New York because he was on TV. So he has popularity, right? So first he tried to be a senator in the Carolinas, didn't make it. Then he tried to run for president of the United States, didn't make it. So what now? We're your consolation prize? Because you lost in those two arenas, now it gives you the privilege and the knowledge to run New York City? Come on. When you see his speeches, wherever you see he goes, his face mask says yang.com. Who are you promoting? Why doesn't it say New York City forever? Why doesn't it talk about New York City? Yang.com is what he's promoting. Let's forget about Yang for a minute, right? And while Yang was at his beach house during the pandemic, you know where I was? I was boarding up my stores in New York City. I was helping all my fellow neighbors board up the stores in New York City. And then when the COVID was lifted, I employed New York City. Now he's back. Then let's talk about McGuire, right? Citicorp guy, vice president. You look at his website, his colors are black and yellow, which are Panther colors. If you look at all his marketing, it's all about BLM. He spends his time during the Ferguson trial with McGuire for mayor, right? Behind the cameras, another advertisement. He doesn't spend any time in Manhattan. If you look at all his social campaign, he's running through the streets in Harlem, in the Bronx, claiming how he grew up in that neighborhood. Yeah, you grew up in that neighborhood. But what you're forgetting to tell these people is in 2008, when you were vice president for Citicorp, Citicorp foreclosed on 6,000 mortgages in these neighborhoods. Where were you then? You're not running through the streets, you're being chased out of the streets. He's not being truthful. Then let's get over to Adams, Brooklyn president. Look at who he associates himself with, all BLM. There's not one There's not one other diversification on his team. Where are we going to go with these two individuals? You know where we're going to go. We're going to go into a divided city because all they care about is their neighborhoods. What they don't realize is that Manhattan is the top tax payer in all the 5 boroughs. People, unfortunately, to say all the boroughs need to be taken care of, but nobody's talking about Manhattan. Nobody's talking about the Broadways being closed. Nobody's talking about the issues, the crime in Manhattan, because you're going down that BLM pathway to get these votes. Because you know what happened? When de Blasio got elected, he got elected by 28%, which is the fewest voters ever to turn out in a New York City election. And 80%.
It was 19.5%. It was 19.5.
So I was even off of a little. All right. So it's even worse. And the majority of those votes were from minority sectors. So what's happening now in this election is most of the people that aren't minority are like, listen, we've been left out. We can no longer just sit home and not vote. We got to get out and vote. So a change has to be done, or else we're going to be in the same 4 year for a mess.
Well, and I'll go back to my question again, that, like, you know, I just think that there is, and I've said this to friends of mine, you know, nationally, right, that, you know, there is a tremendous opportunity. We watched Tim Scott the other night on the State of the Union response. And I thought he delivered an amazing speech, but, you know, that I think there was an opportunity. And the one thing he came out with right away was about the schools, right? First thing you talked about was the schools. We talked about, like, we're not a racist country. The first thing you talked about the schools and the reopenings. And I think there was a lot of frustrated moms out there that think that the city has failed them, right?
Absolutely.
And I guess my question to you is, what are you going to tell these moms about how the city is going to, you know, fix the educational nightmare that's happened in the last year, right? And then on top of that, like, you know, how are you going to reach out to them? And I think that's a big thing that I think our audience wants to hear.
It's not the last year. Our school system has been crumbling and going backwards ever since Bloomberg left. De Blasio put it in the city's hands and it's been going down. If you look at the grade point averages back when Bloomberg was in business, back when the city school systems were run by a private organization, the scores were much better. De Blasio's administration dropped the ball on the school system.
Right, but what would you tell these moms then? What would you tell these moms? What would you tell them?
It needs to be privatized. It needs to be made safer. It needs to have money injected into the school system. The unions need to start working with the parents. It's not just about the teachers, right? It's also about the students. What's best for the students? I have teachers that come into BJ now all the time for lunch and dinner, and they complain they don't have enough resources. There's no internet. There's no, there's not enough supplies to go to the kids. Where's this money going? We need to make sure that the money that is being allocated for the schools get to the schools and don't get instead to the unions and to the 401k pension plans. The kids need to come first. We need to instill after school specials. We need to get better foods into the cafeteria. We need to open up the schools. You know how frustrating it is? I have a 16-year-old daughter. I'm a divorced parent. But when my daughter was young and I'm in the city, I used to have to figure out, what am I going to do with her on a snow day, right? What am I going to do with her on the weekends? These parents right now, with the schools being shut down because of COVID, it was so stressful for them. Not only that they have to worry about the meals that they would have gotten in school, now they've got to figure out who's going to take care of their kids. And the only reason the schools stayed closed is because de Blasio worked out a deal with the union that said, if the infection rate hits 4%, the schools shut down. Come on. Why 4%? Why did the schools need to be shut down? They've already proven that kids is the smallest sector of the infection rate. We could have equipped the teachers with the proper PPP gear. You know, there was so much more we could have done instead of just shutting down the school systems. But they were shut down.
Let me ask you this. Would you require the unions to mandate vaccinations with all the teachers and accurately report that? Because I think that's a huge problem in the city right now, is that what I'm hearing is that the unions are telling their members not to tell people that they're vaccinated, and that's one of the reasons why they're staying out of the classroom. Would you mandate that as mayor?
Right now, I myself would not take the vaccination because every couple of you hear about somebody who is at near death. I know it's a small percentage of the effects that are going the opposite direction when you get a vaccine, but tell that to that person who just received a vaccine and now they're paralyzed, or tell that to the mother whose kids is now sick because of the vaccine. I think we need to study the vaccine a little bit more before we make it a mandate. But again, the unions, when they got involved with the reopening or the closing of the schools, a lot of them, for example, I'll give you an example. Some of the most popular hotels right now in my neighborhood are closed down. They're closed down. Do you know why? Because the union says to the hotel owners, if you want our staff to come back to work, we need to get paid hazard pay, because you're asking us to bring employees back during a pandemic. Hazard pay, according to the union's guideline, are 3 times your natural pay. So you know what most of these high-end restaurants have done, like the Peninsula and the St. Regis, which are on my street, they refuse to open down until this silliness goes away.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's a lot responsible for why our.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Absolutely.
Right? Got to tell it like it is.
I'm going to open this up to Ruth and Rima, and I'm sure you guys have questions, so I'm going to let you guys fire away. Ruth? Yep. Rima? Yep.
Coach,
Hello?
I think she's in a bad connection.
I hear her in a bad connection. I know, right? And by the way, I just want to put out there that like the position we're taking right now, and this is like what's on the vaccine, everything is that's everyone's personal choice. And you know, I personally done it, and I took the J&J. But I mean, you know, it's just everyone has their own personal choice on that, and we respect everyone's choice. You know, that's where we look at this. So.
And if something's happening with the connection and somebody has a question after, you can get it to me and I'll respond by email or by WhatsApp or whatever.
Well, Peter, and one of the things we're doing right now is we're recording this, so this is going to be published throughout the Citizens for a Safe New York, you know, feed and everything. We're developing new partnerships. So, and I'm going to actually see you on Wednesday evening with one of my colleagues. So I'm looking forward to meeting with you in person. And you know, we really appreciate your time. Ruth, do you have any questions?
I'm sorry, I'm here now. Well, my number one concern has been safety, because without safety, we have nothing.
I agree.
I don't even know what we're supposed to do about this. So depressing.
I'll tell you what we're supposed to do. We have to stop the badness that's called defunding the police. No business, whether it's personal, whether it's corporate, whether it's federal, has ever been solved by taking money away from the program. It's the opposite. If you want a program to be really successful, you usually have to throw money on it. I have never heard of one platform, one business, one idea work without having money behind it. The second thing we need to do is we need cops on the street. You know, we don't have cops on the street. Now I'm seeing a couple of cops here and there on the corners, but it took months. And the only reason de Blasio is even now putting cops on the street and trying to make the right moves is because now he's trying to line himself up for running for governor. So in his last few months to December, he wants to come out with, you know, a good public appeal. So then he can take that appeal into his next sector, which I'll tell you right now, if that guy becomes governor of New York City, I'm moving to Florida. This guy should not ever be in politics again. We need cops on the street. If I become mayor, we have 1,000 cadets graduate from the New York Police Academy. Your first year, you have to give me the beat. Get on the beat for a year, and get to know your shop owners, get to know your residents, get to know the people in your neighborhoods. It's a proven fact. If you see cops on the beat, low-level crimes like the street crimes that we're seeing now, the stabbings, not the hijacking, the thefts, the purse snatching, just the violent crimes that are happening. With cops on the street, it's going to deteriorate those people from taking those steps. And then we need to train our officers better, right? When you have a woman shooting a person because she doesn't know whether she had a taser or a gun, there's a problem in the system, right? We need to spend more money on making sure that cops are trained better and the bad ones are weeded out. Like think about this in a business aspect. And what bothers me about every candidate that's running, they're thinking about political and not business. If you look at, we have 45,000 cops in New York City. If there's 3 bad apples or 4 bad apples, it's so small. Why do you think that there's the reason? Why do you think that there's such a problem that we have to defund the whole damn police department because of 3, 4 bad apples? We just need to be better at weeding out those 3, 4 apples when they start going through the system. But the defunding the police is ridiculous. Come on, it's crazy. We need somebody who's going to come into the city and treat it like a business, which now they are not. Was I able to answer your question about the crime?
Well,
Yes,
absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce. Yep.
No, I appreciate your answer.
Thank you. And you know what I keep telling everybody? Find out what company makes the zip ties and invest in that company. Because if I could become mayor, we're not going to tolerate the bullshit that's going on right now. You'll be putting zip ties and taken to jail.
So explain what you mean by the zip ties.
Zip ties is the plastic strips that the cops use because they don't have enough handcuffs. So if, there's 40 people fighting and arguing and blocking traffic, they usually put them in zip ties, which is basically plastic handcuffs.
Okay,
One of the
thank you.
ideas I heard, Peter, was that, and then I'll open it back up again, just to follow up on Ruth's question, is on community policing. That I hit a great point on this, was that we're talking about everyone should be on the beat for 1 year. How do you feel about cops being put in for now, because it's going to be, a long time to get this done, public housing, go to the community meetings, have a meeting, they run themselves or whatever it might be. Do you see that as something that, people talking about? I feel like everyone's saying, okay, well, we're let's have more cops or we're going to defund the police, but no one's really thought about the middle ground, which is, hey, let's get these cops in the middle of public housing where they talk to the residents and they go there, once a week or once a month or whatever it might be. How would you do that as mayor, and how would you implement that? I think we got some background noise from somebody. I just don't know who it's from. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So you need to hire a liaison that is going to be able to communicate what's going on between the police and the residents. You can't take a cop off the street and put him in a situation in the housing to go and speak to the tenants and the residents. You need to get a liaison who knows exactly what the issues are with the residents, the issues are with the police, and then come up with a plan. It's very hard to get a cop that you're training on self-defense, on the laws of the street, on fighting crime, and then you want them to turn a 360 degree and now become a liaison in these neighborhoods. No, you have to hire the right people to go in and do that.
Fair enough. Yep. Ladies, do you have any other questions?
We're looking forward to getting together at your restaurant on the 24th of May, and we can come speak to you, meet you in person, and get to know you better.
I look forward to it. I do much better in person. This Zoom thing, I like to talk with my hands. I'm very emotional when it comes to this, and I feel constrained in the little camera. So I look forward to meeting everybody.
I appreciate that, Peter. I'm going to see you on Wednesday, so I appreciate that. And And yes, so thank you so much for your time. And we really look forward to staying in touch with you. And again, this is going to be published on a couple different feeds. And I'm sure we're going to get questions back. And I will certainly direct those questions to you.
You get them to me, I'll answer them back. Thank you,
Great.
sir.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you
Ciao.
so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.